What if a child was born not to learn, but to remember? Welcome back to the Roots of Fear, where we uncover the darkest stories hidden in the shadows. Tonight, we delve into the peculiar tale of a family whose very existence challenged the laws of nature in the rolling hills of post-Civil War Kentucky. In the year 1873, when America still nursed the wounds of a nation divided, Kentucky stood as a land of contradictions. The air carried both the sweetness of bourbon aging in oak barrels and the lingering bitterness of a conflict not yet forgotten. It was a time when superstition and science existed in uneasy proximity, when folk remedies and modern medicine competed for authority in the remote hollows and valleys that folded like crumpled velvet across the bluegrass state. The Ashford estate sat nestled between two modest mountains in Harlan County, a sprawling farmhouse of weathered cedar and stone that appeared to have grown organically from the very earth. The surrounding forest pressed close, as if perpetually attempting to reclaim the cleared land for itself. Ancient oaks and maples stood sentinel, their branches forming a cathedral-like canopy that dappled the sunlight into ghostly patterns across the property. The family had settled there 3 generations prior, having arrived from England with unusual wealth and peculiar habits. They kept to themselves, employing only a handful of locals who would return to town with strange tales they dared not speak above a whisper. The Ashfords were oddities, educated and refined, yet reclusive to a degree that sparked inevitable suspicion. Emmeline Ashford, the matriarch, was a woman of striking appearance, tall and severe, with hair the color of burnished copper that she wore piled atop her head like a crown. Her husband, Theodore, was rarely seen. Rumored to conduct scientific experiments in the east wing of the house, where strange lights often glowed well past midnight. Their 5 children were educated at home, never attending the local school or Sunday services at the white clapboard church in town. It was the midwife Sarah Collalton who first witnessed the aberration. Having delivered babies across 3 counties for nearly 25 years, she had been summoned to the Ashford home on a night when storm clouds swallowed the moon and rain lashed against the windows like desperate fingers seeking entry. Emmeline's labor had been brief, unusually so for a first child, and Sarah had expected the typical squalling, helpless newborn to emerge. What slid into her waiting hands instead defied comprehension. The infant, perfectly formed and eerily silent, had opened eyes that held an awareness no newborn should possess. And when Sarah had placed the baby girl on her mother's chest, the child had pushed herself up on impossibly strong arms, twisted her tiny body, and simply stood, unsteady, yes, but standing nonetheless on her mother's torso, tiny feet finding purchase on Emmeline's sweat-dampened nightgown. In the flickering lamplight, Sarah had caught the expression on Emmeline's face, not surprise or horror, but weary resignation. Theodore standing in the doorway had merely nodded as if confirming a hypothesis long in testing. "She's perfect," he had whispered, "just like the others will be." Sarah never spoke of what she had seen that night. But as the Ashford family grew, whispers spread through Harlan County like fog through mountain valleys, of children born already walking, already knowing, already different in ways no one could quite articulate. The tales of the Ashford children spread with the cautious hesitancy of those who fear being branded madmen. By 1875, the family had 3 children, all born with the same unsettling precocity. Each had entered the world with eyes that seemed to hold ancient knowledge and motor skills that defied medical understanding. Local physician Dr. Raymond Crowther, who had studied at medical colleges in Philadelphia, documented his observations in a journal he kept locked in his desk drawer, writing by candlelight long after his wife had retired to bed. The developmental anomalies displayed by the Ashford offspring represent a fundamental deviation from established biological principles, he wrote, his normally steady hand trembling slightly. Their muscular coordination and cognitive awareness suggest a gestation period far exceeding the standard 9 months. Yet Mrs. Ashford's pregnancies follow conventional timelines. In town, conversations would cease when strangers entered the general store. The proprietor, William Thatcher, had developed a habit of changing subjects with practiced ease whenever the Ashford name arose. The family's twice-monthly visits to purchase supplies became events of silent scrutiny, townspeople watching from behind curtained windows as the copper-haired mother guided her unnaturally poised children through the muddy streets. The post-war economy had brought hardship to many in Harlan County. Yet, the Ashford estate maintained its prosperity. Their fields yielded crops even in years when others failed. Their livestock remained curiously free of the ailments that plagued neighboring farms. Some attributed this to Theodore Ashford's scientific knowledge. Others whispered of unholy pacts made in the dense forest behind their property, where the oldest trees grew in patterns that seemed almost deliberate. During the summer of 1876, when drought cracked the earth and withered crops across Kentucky, Reverend Josiah Miller preached a sermon that never mentioned the Ashfords by name, but spoke at length about unnatural things that wore the guise of God's creations. 3 days later, his church burned to the ground, the flames taking on hues of green and purple that witnesses described as more suited to a carnival than a conflagration. Emmeline Ashford's fourth pregnancy coincided with an unusual celestial event, a meteor shower of exceptional brilliance that illuminated the countryside for 3 consecutive nights. The locals stayed indoors, doors bolted and windows shuttered as fiery streaks painted the autumn sky. Some claimed to hear chanting emanating from the direction of the Ashford property, carried on winds that seemed to blow in impossible directions. Sarah Collalton, summoned once more to deliver an Ashford child, found herself guided to a different chamber this time, a circular room in the east wing where Theodore conducted his mysterious work. The walls were lined with books in languages she could not identify, and intricate brass instruments tracked the movements of heavenly bodies. There, upon a table inscribed with symbols that made her eyes water when she attempted to follow their patterns, Emmeline gave birth to twins, a boy and a girl, both of whom emerged without crying, both of whom stood on trembling legs before their umbilical cords were even severed. The town of Harland had always been prone to its share of peculiarities, cold dust in summer that painted sunsets blood red, winters so severe they froze words in the air. But the bitter spring of 1877 brought a visitor who would forever alter the course of the Ashford legacy. Augustus Pembroke arrived on the eastbound train, a tall figure in a tailored black frock coat that had seen better days, though still marked him as a gentleman of means. His face was gaunt with hollow cheeks that suggested recent illness, yet his eyes burned with feverish intensity beneath a shock of prematurely white hair. He carried a leather physician's bag that never left his possession and took lodgings at the Harland Inn, paying 3 months' rent in advance with gold coins that Mrs. Fletcher, the innkeeper, later swore bore mint dates from the coming year. "I've come on matters scientific and confidential," he announced to Dr. Crowther during an unannounced visit to the physician's office. His accent bore the refined cadence of Boston academia, yet something in its undertones suggested foreign origins. "My correspondence with Theodore Ashford has been most illuminating. I believe our research interests align considerably." Crowther's face had blanched. "You would do well to limit your associations in these parts, sir. The Ashford name carries certain complications." "Complications are precisely my area of expertise," Pembroke replied, his thin lips forming something approximating a smile. "The developmental anomalies exhibited by the progeny of distinct bloodlines have been the focus of my studies at Miskatonic University." What transpired during Augustus Pembroke's first visit to the Ashford estate remained unwitnessed by townsfolk. The family's groundskeeper, old Tobias Wilkes, a man who had lost an arm at Shiloh and claimed the phantom limb still ached whenever the Ashford children passed near, reported only that the stranger's carriage had arrived at midday and departed well after midnight. The Ashford twins, now approaching their first birthday, though resembling children of 3 or 4 in both physique and demeanor, were said to have taken a particular interest in the visitor. Elizabeth Sullivan, who delivered milk to the estate twice weekly, glimpsed them through an open doorway, sitting perfectly still in matching chairs, their unnaturally steady gaze fixed upon Pembroke as he demonstrated some apparatus that emitted a soft blue light. They spoke to him, Elizabeth whispered to her husband later, her hands trembling as she removed pins from her hair. Not baby talk or childish prattle. They spoke like educated adults, finishing each other's sentences as if sharing a single mind between 2 bodies. In the weeks that followed, Pembroke became a regular presence at the Ashford estate. Curious patterns of lights danced behind the east wing's curtained windows, and locals reported unusual odors, like ozone after lightning strikes mingled with something sweeter, almost cloying, drifting from the property when the wind blew from the north. Theodore Ashford's demeanor changed notably during this period. His rare appearances in town revealed a man transformed by either revelation or terror, his usual scientific detachment replaced by a nervous energy that set his hands trembling as he purchased increasingly exotic supplies from William Thatcher's store, sulfur in unusual quantities, specially ordered glassware from Europe, preserving salts typically used by taxidermists. The celestial conjunction approaches. Tobias overheard Theodore tell Pembroke as they walked the estate's perimeter one evening. The children sense it. Emmeline dreams of it. The time for observation ends. Soon we must act. The final days of April 1877 brought relentless rains that transformed the dirt roads of Harland County into viscous ribbons of mud, isolating homesteads and drowning newly planted crops. Yet amid this diluvian punishment, 5-year-old Daniel Thatcher, son of the general store proprietor, vanished without explanation on the night of the new moon. Search parties combed the sodden forests for 3 days, their lanterns forming constellations that drifted through mist-shrouded valleys. They found nothing until dawn of the 4th day when young Daniel emerged from the tree line nearest the Ashford property. The boy appeared unharmed, his clothing inexplicably dry and clean despite the torrential downpours. But those who witnessed his return spoke of alterations more unsettling than mere physical transformation. His gait, whispered Martha Coleman, the school teacher, he moved like a marionette operated by hands unfamiliar with the mechanics of human locomotion. Daniel's usual childish stumbling had been replaced by a precise, deliberate movement reminiscent of the Ashford children's unnatural poise. When questioned about his absence, Daniel spoke in monotonous, measured sentences, his vocabulary suddenly expanded beyond his years. He claimed no memory of where he had been, yet often paused mid-conversation to stare at points in empty air, nodding slightly as though acknowledging unseen presences. His parents reported finding him standing beside his bed at night, eyes open but unseeing, murmuring equations and phrases in languages no local could identify. The changes in Daniel coincided with unprecedented activity at the Ashford estate. Smoke in variegated hues, violet, emerald, and a peculiar shade of amber that caused temporary blindness in those who gazed upon it too long, billowed from the east wing's chimneys at all hours. The forest surrounding the property began exhibiting botanical aberrations. Mushrooms of impossible dimensions erupted from the forest floor, their caps inscribed with patterns that resembled mathematical formulas, while the oldest oaks exuded a clear sap that hardened into crystalline formations resembling human faces frozen in expressions of ecstasy or agony. Dr. Crowther, summoned to examine Daniel, discovered a perfect circular marking at the base of the boy's skull, its edges raised like scar tissue, though the skin appeared unbroken. When he pressed his stethoscope against the child's chest, Crowther later confessed to Reverend Miller's replacement that he heard not one heartbeat, but two, perfectly synchronized yet distinct, as though another heartbeat alongside his own, within the same cage of ribs. Emmeline Ashford's final pregnancy progressed with unnerving swiftness, her abdomen expanding to impossible proportions within mere weeks. Those who glimpsed her on her increasingly rare appearances observed her skin had taken on a translucent quality, blue veins visible beneath like rivers seen on maps of foreign lands. The household staff, reduced to only Tobias and 2 mute sisters from the adjacent county, reported hearing multiple heartbeats emanating from her womb. A chorus, Tobias said during one of his increasingly frequent visits to the tavern. Like a congregation reciting prayers in whispered unison. As May approached, Augustus Pembroke dispatched a flurry of telegrams to colleagues at Miskatonic University. Their partially deciphered contents alarming the telegraph operator sufficiently to contact authorities in Louisville. The messages spoke of gestational acceleration beyond predicted parameters and ancestral memory transference complete in juvenile subjects, concluding with an urgent request for specialized equipment to document what he termed the emergence of the next developmental phase in human evolution. A package arrived at the Harland County Historical Society in the autumn of 1952. Its brown paper wrapping weathered and stained, bearing postage from an untraceable origin. Inside, the Society's curator discovered a leather-bound journal, its pages brittle with age, containing what appeared to be field notes penned by Augustus Pembroke during those fateful days of May 1877. The Society kept these documents sealed until present day when scholarly interest in the Ashford case prompted their examination. What follows is a faithful transcription of the most pertinent entries. May 3, 1877. The celestial convergence approaches. My calculations indicate the alignment will reach its apex precisely at midnight on the 7th. Theodore's preparations are methodical, but betray a growing anxiety. He knows far more than he has shared with me. I have observed him administering a tincture of his own creation to Emmeline thrice daily. The solution bears a faint bioluminescence and smells of copper and honeysuckle. The twins continue to demonstrate extraordinary capabilities. Yesterday, I witnessed them simultaneously solve differential equations I had purposely left visible on my workstation. Neither child has received mathematical instruction beyond basic arithmetic. When questioned about their methodology, they responded in perfect unison. The numbers speak to us from before, from beyond, from after. We merely listen. Most concerning is my discovery beneath the east wing, the subterranean chamber Theodore finally revealed houses what he terms the vessel, an ancient stone basin of non-Euclidean geometry. Its material defying all known geological classification. The interior surface bears inscriptions in a script that appears to predate Sumerian cuneiform, yet contains symbolic similarities to astronomical notations found at megalithic sites across Europe. Something moves within the stone itself. I am certain of it. Asterisk May 5, 1877. The Thatcher boy visited again today, arriving unprompted at precisely 3:06, just as he has each afternoon since his return. The children welcomed him as though expecting his arrival. They formed a circle in the observatory, hands joined, and commenced the harmonization process Theodore has termed synaptic resonance. I observed the phenomenon for 18 minutes before blood began seeping from my ears. Emmeline's condition accelerates beyond all medical precedent. The movement beneath her skin is visible even from across the room. Not the typical shifting of a near-term fetus, but coordinated deliberate patterns suggesting multiple entities moving in orchestrated sequence. Theodore speaks of the culmination with religious fervor. He has abandoned all pretense of scientific objectivity. Local livestock continue to demonstrate inexplicable behavior. Tobias reports that cattle from 3 neighboring farms have been found standing in concentric circles facing the Ashford property, remaining motionless for hours regardless of weather conditions. Birds have begun arranging themselves on the telephone wires in patterns that unmistakably resemble the markings on the vessel. May 6, 1877. I can no longer trust my own perceptions. The boundaries between observed phenomena and hallucinatory experience have dissolved. The children, all 5 Ashford offspring, plus the Thatcher boy, spend hours staring at the night sky through windows specially cut to match astronomical angles. They speak a language that changes the air pressure within the room. Theodore has revealed his true purpose at last. The walking children are not the culmination, but merely vessels prepared for what comes tomorrow night. Emmeline's final pregnancy is not a natural gestation, but an incubation. What they have been breeding is not entirely human. I have destroyed my return ticket. There is no leaving now. I must witness what emerges. The entry abruptly ends here with a dark stain obscuring the bottom third of the page. On the evening of May 7, 1877, a peculiar stillness descended upon Harland County. Birds ceased their songs at precisely 4:17 in the afternoon, as noted in the meteorological log maintained by the station master. The air grew dense with anticipation, pressing against windows and doors like an invisible tide seeking entry. Even the perpetual creaking of the coal mine supports fell silent, prompting the night shift workers to emerge from the earth prematurely, their faces grey with more than just coal dust. Dr. Crowther, having received no response to 3 increasingly urgent messages delivered to Augustus Pembroke, resolved to visit the Ashford estate himself. The moon hung low and swollen on the horizon as he guided his mare along the winding path, its usual silver light distorted through an atmosphere that seemed to bend light in subtle, unsettling ways. The doctor later described the journey as swimming upstream through molasses, with every natural law stretched to its breaking point. Upon cresting the final hill overlooking the Ashford property, Crowther witnessed a tableau that defied rational explanation. The sprawling farmhouse stood bathed in illumination that emanated not from lamps or fire, but from the structure itself, wood and stone glowing with a pulsating radiance that cast no shadows. Surrounding the estate, hundreds of townsfolk stood in perfect concentric circles, their faces upturned toward the night sky, expressions blank yet somehow anticipatory. Among them stood William Thatcher, his son Daniel's hand clasped in his own, both perfectly motionless, save for the slow, synchronous blinking of their eyes. The general store proprietor, who had vocally advocated for a delegation to investigate the Ashford family just days prior, now seemed entranced, a willing participant in whatever communion transpired upon the property. Crowther dismounted at the outer periphery, his medical bag clutched to his chest like a talisman. His mare refused to advance further, trembling violently until he secured her to a fence post well away from the gathering. As he approached on foot, he felt a curious pressure building behind his eyes, accompanied by whispers that seemed to originate within his own thoughts, yet carried cadences and vocabularies entirely foreign to his mind. The great oak doors of the Ashford home stood open, emitting a column of that same unearthly luminescence straight into the night sky, where it appeared to connect with a particular arrangement of stars, a constellation unrecorded in any astronomical text, yet one that Crowther realized with mounting horror he somehow recognized, as though the knowledge had always resided dormant within him. From within the house came a sound that defied classification, neither human cry nor animal call, but something that incorporated elements of both while transcending either description. It resonated at a frequency that caused the pocket watch in Crowther's waistcoat to vibrate against his ribs, its mechanical ticking accelerating until the device shattered, its gears spraying outward like metallic tears. The physician's legs carried him forward against his will, drawn inexorably toward that open door, and the revelation waiting beyond. His last coherent notation, scribbled frantically in his journal before crossing the threshold, reads, "God help us." They were never walking toward us. They were walking toward something else. Something waiting for them to open the way. The aftermath of the events at the Ashford estate transformed Harland County irrevocably. By the autumn of 1877, nearly one-third of the local population had abandoned their homesteads, fleeing with little more than could be carried in hastily loaded wagons. Those who remained exhibited subtle anomalies in gait and speech patterns that became more pronounced with each passing generation. The Louisville Courier published only a single article regarding the incident, varied between advertisements for patent tonics and reports of railroad expansion, unusual astronomical event observed in eastern Kentucky. May 8, 1877. Reports from Harland County describe an unusual celestial phenomenon observed Tuesday evening last. Witnesses claim a column of light extended from the vicinity of the Ashford property into the night sky for approximately 43 minutes, accompanied by atmospheric disturbances that affected timepieces throughout the region. Scientific authorities attribute the occurrence to meteorological conditions particular to the mountain valleys, possibly involving electrical discharges similar to St. Elmo's fire. The Ashford family, prominent local landowners, could not be reached for comment. The omissions in this account speak volumes. No mention was made of the 27 individuals who vanished that night, including every member of the Ashford household. No reference to the perfectly circular clearing that appeared in the forest behind the property, where vegetation has steadfastly refused to grow in the century since. Nothing about the inexplicable reversal of the local river's flow for precisely 7 hours following the event. Records in the Kentucky State Archives contain correspondence between Governor James B. McCreary and federal authorities requesting specialized personnel to investigate biological contamination of unknown origin in Harland County. These letters, marked with unusual classification codes, culminated in the arrival of a team from the Smithsonian Institution, who remained in residence for 11 months, collecting samples of soil, water, and blood from willing residents. Their findings remain sealed, accessible only through Freedom of Information requests that invariably return documents so heavily redacted they resemble abstract art more than scientific reports. One partially visible conclusion states, genetic divergence suggesting accelerated evolutionary processes without clear causative mechanism, recommend ongoing surveillance of bloodlines with particular attention to, the remainder is obscured by black ink. The Harland County Historical Society maintains a curious collection of photographs taken between 1877 and 1900 displaying children born in the region after the incident. A careful observer might note the subtle elongation of digits, the slightly disproportionate growth of cranial structure, the unusual posture maintained even by infants mere months old. Most telling is the parish record from St. Stephen's Church, reconstructed after the fire that consumed its predecessor. The baptismal registry contains a curious annotation beside the names of certain newborns, a small symbol resembling a 5-point star with a circular center. This marking, applied by Reverend Michael Calloway, who assumed pastoral duties in 1878, appears with increasing frequency as the decades progressed. When interviewed in 1912, an elderly Calloway would say only that the marking identified those who arrived already knowing the way, who never needed to learn how to walk because they remembered what came before and what waits beyond. The yellow documentation trail of the Ashford incident grows increasingly fragmented as one approaches modern times. In 1923, a visiting geological survey team discovered peculiar crystalline formations in the abandoned mine shafts beneath Harlan County, structures that appeared to have grown in deliberate patterns resembling neural pathways. Their samples, dispatched to laboratories at Princeton University, disappeared in transit. The courier responsible was later found wandering the Appalachian foothills, speaking in mathematical equations and claiming to have delivered the specimens elsewhere when they were needed. Throughout the Great Depression, Harlan County maintained a curious prosperity compared to surrounding regions. Agricultural yields remained inexplicably abundant despite drought conditions that devastated neighboring counties. Local physicians documented birth rates significantly above national averages with an unusually high incidence of multiple births, predominantly twins and triplets who demonstrated accelerated development milestones. These children, according to school records preserved in the county educational archives, universally exhibited exceptional mathematical aptitude and a peculiar affinity for astronomical concepts beyond the standard curriculum. During the Second World War, government interest in the region intensified. Declassified military records reveal that the Office of Strategic Services dispatched a specialized unit to requisition local children for what was cryptically termed Project Wayfinder, an initiative exploring unconventional navigation methodologies for submarine and aircraft operations in zero-visibility conditions. The unusually precise spatial awareness demonstrated by Harlan County youth made them particularly valuable subjects, their ability to orient themselves without external reference points defying conventional explanation. Perhaps most disturbing was the discovery made during the Tennessee Valley Authority's survey work in 1954. Engineers mapping subterranean water tables beneath the former Ashford property discovered an extensive network of tunnels that appeared on no mining charts. Expedition notes describe passageways of non-standard dimensions that seem to accommodate beings of proportions diverging significantly from human norms. The walls bore markings consistent with those found on the vessel described in Pembroke's journal, arranged in sequences that a consulting mathematician from MIT identified as representing coordinates in a non-Euclidean geometric system. The tunnels remained unexplored beyond initial surveys. 3 members of the original mapping team subsequently relocated to Harlan County permanently, severing previous professional and personal connections. Their descendants maintain residences there to this day, occupying positions of modest influence in local governance. Census data reveals another statistical anomaly worth noting. Harlan County has maintained the nation's highest percentage of children born capable of walking within hours of birth. Medical literature attributes this to a localized genetic anomaly of unknown origin, a convenient explanation that fails to address the consistent testimony of midwives who report delivering newborns with fully established dentition and cognitive responses more typical of toddlers than infants. These children still appear periodically in the county records, marked in modern medical files with a discrete genetic identifier rather than Reverend Calloway's star symbol, yet serving the same cataloging purpose. They are monitored through childhood by specialists affiliated with institutes bearing unfamiliar acronyms and operating under educational research pretexts. Their ultimate destinations once they reach maturity remain conspicuously undocumented. The descendants of those who remained in Harlan County after the Ashford incident developed certain recognizable traits over generations. Subtle distinctions that outsiders might attribute to geographic isolation, but locals recognized as their inheritance. Their faces possessed symmetry just slightly too perfect. Their movements conserving energy with an efficiency that made them appear to glide rather than walk. They tended toward careers in mathematics, astronomy, and peculiarly horology, the science of timepieces, their workshops producing clocks of bewildering complexity that kept time with celestial bodies beyond our solar system. In 1977, precisely 1 century after the Ashford incident, local journalist Eleanor Wilkes, great-granddaughter of old Tobias, documented a curious phenomenon in her private correspondence, recently donated to the Appalachian Cultural Heritage Foundation. She described how every child born in Harlan County during that centennial year emerged with a distinctive birthmark at the base of the skull, a perfect circle surrounding what appeared to be a 5-point star identical to Reverend Calloway's baptismal notation. These children speak to one another without words, Eleanor wrote to her sister in Louisville. I've observed them in the playground behind the elementary school, arranged in geometric patterns while maintaining complete silence, yet clearly communicating through some faculty I cannot perceive. When questioned, they smile with identical expressions and reply that they are practicing for the journey. Government interest resurged. Photographs preserved in recently declassified files show black sedans with federal plates parked near the Harlan County Hospital during delivery dates. Birth records from that year contain unusual gaps, names redacted, files removed entirely, suggesting intervention beyond mere documentation. Professor Martin Chambers of Columbia University, while researching Appalachian folklore in 1982, recorded interviews with elderly residents who described a night when the stars moved wrong above the former Ashford property. They recounted how the Centennial children, then 5 years old, gathered unbidden at the circular clearing in the forest on May 7, forming concentric rings reminiscent of the configuration witnessed a century prior. They waited for something, explained 90-year-old Eunice Thatcher, whose grandfather had been the store proprietor during the original incident. Standing motionless until dawn, their small faces turned skyward. When the sun rose, they dispersed without speaking, returning to their homes as though nothing unusual had occurred. But something changed that night. Something opened or closed. The children were different afterward, more present, yet somehow more distant, as though their attention had been irrevocably divided between here and elsewhere. Archaeological surveys conducted in 1995 uncovered fragments of the Ashford foundation stones bearing microscopic crystalline structures inconsistent with any known geological formation. Under electron microscopy, these crystals revealed organizational patterns identical to neural networks, suggesting the building materials themselves possess some form of distributed intelligence. A discovery quietly buried in academic journals of limited circulation, but referenced obliquely in theoretical physics papers exploring consciousness as a fundamental property of matter. The Ashford legacy persists in more quotidian ways as well, in the perfect posture of Harlan County residents, in their children who never crawl but rise directly to walking, in family names that echo through county records like Thatcher, Wilkes, and Crowther, bloodlines carrying forward something introduced that night beneath stars arranged in a pattern still visible to those who know where and how to look. The curious case of the Ashford family and their walking children gathers regular interest from various academic institutions to this day. Most investigations remain superficial, their researchers seemingly losing focus midway through their work, returning to their universities with incomplete data and a peculiar reluctance to revisit the subject. Yet, occasionally, more determined scholars persist. Dr. Eleanor Chambers, great-granddaughter of Professor Martin Chambers, whose 1980s research barely scratched the surface of the mystery, arrived in Harlan County during the summer solstice of 2017. Unlike previous investigators, she came equipped with both familial connection to the case and specialized equipment designed to detect radiation signatures outside standard measurement parameters. Her field journal, excerpted below, provides perhaps the most scientifically rigorous examination of the phenomenon to date. June 21, 2017. I've established my monitoring station at the edge of the barren circle where the Ashford estate once stood. The soil here defies conventional analysis, simultaneously dead and hyperactive at a quantum level. My instruments detect patterns of subatomic vibration that correspond to no known natural frequency, oscillating in perfect harmony with certain stellar bodies that will achieve conjunction approximately 43 days from now. The locals maintain a polite distance but observe my work. Their children, particularly those born during the 2007 Echo year, precisely 130 years after the original incident, gather at the forest's edge each evening at sunset. They neither approach nor retreat, standing with that perfect stillness noted throughout historical accounts. Today, I recovered something extraordinary from the central point of the clearing, a fragment of what appears to be the vessel described in Pembroke's journal. Under polarized light, the material reveals structures that can only be described as four-dimensional geometric patterns that shift when viewed from different angles to reveal entirely new configurations that mathematical models suggest cannot exist simultaneously in conventional space. When placed near standard recording equipment, the fragment generates interference that manifests as voices speaking in multiple languages simultaneously, some recognized, others entirely unknown. Linguistic analysis software identifies syntactical patterns consistent with information-dense communication rather than random noise. Most disturbing was this morning's interaction with Harland County Hospital's chief obstetrician, Dr. Margaret Thatcher. The family name persists as noted in historical records. She granted me access to anonymized medical files documenting birth anomalies spanning 5 generations. The progressive anatomical adaptations are subtle but unmistakable: slight elongation of the digits, enhanced musculature allowing immediate load-bearing on underdeveloped limbs, and most significantly neurological development that should be impossible in newborns. "We've learned not to be alarmed," Dr. Thatcher explained with the same eerily perfect posture characteristic of local residents. "They aren't developing faster than normal humans. They're remembering what they already knew." When I inquired about the destination of Harland County's unusually developed children upon reaching adulthood, she smiled with practiced politeness. "They go where they're needed, Dr. Chambers. Some stay to prepare the next generation. Others journey farther. The pattern must be maintained until completion." I asked what completion meant. Her response chills me still: "The opening isn't finished. Each generation walks a little further along the path. Soon enough, the doorway works in both directions." The remainder of Dr. Chambers's journal entries become increasingly fragmented after this point. Her equipment detected a massive energy surge on August 9, coinciding with the predicted stellar conjunction. Her final transmission to colleagues at Georgetown University contained only geographic coordinates and the cryptic message, "They're coming home." The astronomical record of Harland County reveals peculiar deviations that have puzzled observers for generations. Every 33 years and 4 months, celestial bodies visible from the former Ashford property align in configurations that violate established orbital mechanics. During these periods, local hospital records document a striking increase in prenatal anomalies, fetuses exhibiting accelerated development, unusual cranial dimensions, and what modern ultrasound technicians describe as synchronized movement patterns suggestive of collective consciousness. The most recent alignment occurred in 2021 when 6 sets of twins were born within 48 hours across Harland County. Medical staff noted that all 12 infants shared identical electroencephalographic patterns despite being housed in separate wings of the facility. More disturbing was the phenomenon documented by night shift nurse Eliza Wilkes, who reported finding the newborns arranged in their bassinets in a precise geometric configuration that, when mapped and viewed from above, formed the same 5-point star pattern that had marked generations of local children. "They weren't crying," Nurse Wilkes wrote in her incident report, subsequently expunged from official records but preserved through her private correspondence. 12 infants, hours old, perfectly silent and watchful. When I approached, they turned their heads in unison to track my movement. When I spoke, attempting to soothe what I initially interpreted as collective distress, they smiled with identical expressions, not the reflexive, gas-induced smiles of typical newborns, but deliberate, knowing gestures that conveyed recognition of something beyond my perception. Analysis of atmospheric samples collected near the barren circle during alignment periods reveals trace elements inconsistent with Earth's established composition. Spectroscopic examination identifies molecular structures matching those observed in deep space near the coordinates encrypted in Dr. Chambers's final transmission. These molecules arrange themselves in patterns resembling the neural networks found in the crystalline structures of the Ashford foundation stones. Most recently, geological surveys utilizing ground-penetrating radar have mapped the tunnel system beneath the former Ashford property in unprecedented detail. The passages extend far deeper than previously documented, forming an intricate 3-dimensional labyrinth that, when rendered in computer modeling, creates a structure mathematically identical to the arrangement of stars visible during the 1877 convergence, a cosmic blueprint replicated in subterranean architecture. Perhaps most unsettling was the discovery made last autumn by telecommunications engineers investigating signal anomalies affecting cellular networks throughout Appalachia. Their diagnostic equipment detected consistent data transmissions originating from beneath the barren circle encoded in protocols that matched no known terrestrial technology. The transmissions intensify during astronomical alignments, beaming toward specific coordinates in deep space with precision that exceeds current satellite capabilities. When decoded using algorithms derived from the mathematical patterns observed in the Harland County Children's Playground arrangements, the transmissions contain what appears to be a countdown sequence converging on a date 33 months from the 2021 alignment, December 7, 2023. The message repeating in mathematical sequences rather than linguistic constructs translates approximately to, "The children have prepared the way." The door opens fully when the stars align. We return to walk among you. The growing collection of Ashford records, from historical documents to scientific observations, continues to expand at the University of Kentucky's Special Collections Research Center. Last month, a weathered metal box was discovered during renovation work on the old Harland County Hospital's East Wing. Inside, preserved between layers of waxed canvas, lay a collection of daguerreotypes dated 1893, capturing 3 generations of walking children arranged in formal portrait settings. What makes these images extraordinary isn't merely their subject matter, but the peculiar distortion evident in each plate. The children posed with that characteristic perfect posture appear to exist simultaneously in multiple positions, their forms slightly transparent as if captured in motion despite the long exposure times necessary for photography of that era. More disturbing still are their eyes, which reflect light at angles physics dictates impossible, creating luminous points that form connecting lines when the images are overlaid. Accompanying the photographs was a leather-bound notebook belonging to Dr. Isaiah Thatcher, great-grandson of the original store proprietor William. His medical observations detail the anatomical peculiarities found in 4th-generation Harland County children. The supplementary nervous tissue observed at the base of the cranium appears to function as a secondary processing center, independent of yet communicating with the primary brain. Dissection reveals filament structures of unknown composition extending throughout the skeletal system, predominantly concentrated in the lower extremities. These filaments emit measurable electrical discharges when stimulated by certain celestial events, suggesting a biological antenna calibrated to extraterrestrial frequencies. Most significant among the discoveries was a brittle parchment map annotated in Theodore Ashford's hand, showing the Kentucky region with unusual markings at specific geographic coordinates. When these points are connected, they form a perfect match to both the tunnels beneath the Ashford property and the stellar configuration observed during the 1877 incident. More troubling, the document bears timestamps suggesting it was created nearly 2 decades before the Ashfords arrived in Kentucky, as if Theodore had been following a predetermined architectural plan laid out long before his birth. Genetic researcher Dr. Samantha Crowther, whose ancestry traces back to the physician who witnessed the original incidents, recently published findings suggesting the distinctive mutations in Harland County bloodlines represent directed evolution rather than random adaptation. Her analysis of mitochondrial DNA samples collected across 5 generations reveals alterations too precise for natural selection, yet inconsistent with modern human genetic engineering capabilities. "What we're observing isn't evolution as we understand it," she noted in last month's Journal of Experimental Taxonomy. "It's as if something reached backward through time to adjust human development toward a specific outcome." The walking children weren't merely physical anomalies. They were biological waypoints marking a path toward something we're only beginning to comprehend. As the December 2023 alignment approaches, unusual weather patterns have developed above the barren circle. Clouds form perfect concentric rings that remain stationary despite prevailing winds, while electromagnetic instruments record pulses synchronizing precisely with the movements of specific stars that according to astronomical records shouldn't be visible from Earth's current position in the galaxy. A hush has settled over Harland County in recent weeks. A silence that presses against window panes and filters through keyhole slots with purposeful insistence. The barometric pressure fluctuates in patterns meteorologists cannot reconcile with natural weather systems, rising and falling in perfect mathematical sequences that correspond to prime numbers. Local wildlife responds to these atmospheric aberrations with instinctual terror. Deer stand motionless in forest clearings, their eyes reflecting moonlight with prismatic distortions, while birds arrange themselves on power lines in configurations identical to the constellations visible only during the alignment periods. The children born during the 2021 convergence have begun speaking in unified cadences, their vocabulary impossibly sophisticated. They draw identical images without communication, intricate diagrams of molecular structures that university chemists identify as theoretical compounds capable of altering the fundamental properties of spacetime. Their artwork appears in synchronized bursts, most often during the pre-dawn hours when the barren circle pulsates with faint luminescence discernible only through specialized photography. "They're preparing us," whispers Margaret Thatcher as she compares ultrasound images of currently gestating fetuses throughout the county. Each generation carries more of what's coming. The original Ashfords were merely vessels, imperfect prototypes of what's been growing among us for 150 years. The tunnel system beneath the former Ashford property emits subtle vibrations now, rhythmic tremors that travel through bedrock and manifest as unexplained oscillations in carefully placed seismographs. Engineers from Louisville report that these vibrations match precisely the frequency generated by certain neutron stars, pulsations that shouldn't be detectable on Earth without massive receiving arrays. Yet something beneath Harlan County receives these cosmic broadcasts with perfect clarity. Those who venture near the barren circle report discomforting sensations, time dilation that makes watches run inconsistently, spatial distortions that cause distances to expand and contract with each step, and most disturbingly, the persistent feeling of being observed by countless presences just beyond the periphery of vision. Sound behaves strangely within this perimeter. Voices echo with secondary harmonics that weren't present in the original utterance, as though something else speaks simultaneously through the same lips. The Thatcher children, now 6 sets of twins from 3 generations, have begun gathering nightly at the circle's edge. Their identical postures reminiscent of sentinels awaiting a changing of the guard. They bring peculiar objects, timepieces constructed from unidentifiable materials, crystalline structures that respond to stellar movements, small containers of soil collected from specific geographic coordinates matching Theodore Ashford's ancient map. The symmetry is nearly complete, they tell visitors who approach with cautious curiosity. What began as preparation becomes culmination. The walking children were merely the first step. Those who could stand at birth will soon yield to those who arrive already running. Meanwhile, deep beneath the earth, in tunnels carved by hands guided by knowledge beyond human comprehension, something stirs with increasing urgency. The walls themselves seem to breathe, microscopic crystalline structures expanding and contracting in perfect synchronization with the cosmic pulses from above. The countdown approaches its final digits, marking the moment when the door, opened a fraction wider with each generation, finally stands fully ajar. The appointed date draws near, and Harlan County has begun to empty in ways both visible and unseen. Families with no connection to the marked bloodlines quietly pack their belongings under cover of night, leaving behind generations of heritage with nothing but hastily scrawled notes tacked to doors, family emergency or visiting relatives back east. Those with deeper roots, those carrying the subtle genetic markers of the Ashford legacy, remain, their expressions betraying neither fear nor anticipation, but a serene acceptance that borders on religious devotion. Meteorological instruments throughout the eastern seaboard have detected unprecedented gravitational anomalies centered above the barren circle. Tidal patterns along the Atlantic coast demonstrate inexplicable deviations as if responding to a celestial body not accounted for in standard astronomical calculations. The moon itself appears subtly distorted when viewed from Harlan County, its perfect sphere elongated into an elliptical shape that astronomers at the Harvard Observatory cannot reconcile with known optical phenomena. The preparatory adjustments have commenced, explains Eleanor Wilkes to the small congregation gathered in what was once St. Stephen's Church, now repurposed as a community center whose interior bears architectural modifications matching the tunnels beneath the former Ashford estate. The transitional buffer between dimensional planes requires calibration to prevent molecular disruption during the traversal event. Her audience, comprising exclusively descendants of the original witnesses, nods in perfect unison, their faces illuminated by candles arranged in that same 5-point pattern that has recurred throughout a century and a half of documentation. Children sit cross-legged in the center of the formation, their small hands tracing complex equations in the air, fingers leaving momentary phosphorescent trails that linger for precisely 7 seconds before fading. The Kentucky National Guard established checkpoints on roads leading into Harlan County 3 days ago, ostensibly due to environmental concerns requiring containment protocols. Their communications intercepted by amateur radio enthusiasts in neighboring counties reveal growing alarm at the inexplicable failure of electronic equipment within 5 miles of the barren circle. Sophisticated military hardware simply ceases functioning, while antique mechanical devices, particularly timepieces manufactured before 1900, not only continue operating but display impossible accuracy, synchronizing precisely with astronomical movements too subtle for modern instruments to detect. Most telling are the dreams now shared by every inhabitant of Harlan County, vivid nocturnal experiences described in identical language by individuals who have had no communication. They dream of vast architectural spaces constructed from materials that simultaneously exist and don't exist, populated by entities whose geometries shift depending on the observer's position relative to them. These entities move with the same preternatural grace that has marked generations of walking children, yet their movements suggest a dimensional freedom human physiology cannot achieve without fundamental reconstruction. They show us what we are becoming, whispers young Nathaniel Thatcher, the eldest of the 2021 twins, his voice carrying the harmonics that have become the signature of his generation. The walking was just the beginning. Soon we transcend pedal locomotion entirely. The barren circle has begun to pulse with measurable energy that scientists from clandestine government agencies reluctantly identify as matching the theoretical output of a microscopic Einstein-Rosen bridge, a traversable wormhole connecting points in spacetime that conventional physics insists should remain forever separate. The lights of the National Guard vehicles cast long, sickly shadows through the mist that had settled over the roads leading to the barren circle. Their high-powered halogen beams, meant to pierce the darkness with brutal efficiency, instead created a diffuse halo effect as though the particles of air themselves were gently rejecting this intrusion of modern illumination. Gas-powered generators hummed discordantly as electronic equipment continued to fail with increasing frequency, first the satellite phones, then radio transmitters, and finally even battery-operated flashlights flickered and died like terrestrial stars extinguished by an invisible hand. Lieutenant Colonel James Hargrove, whose great-grandfather had left Harlan County in 1877 after witnessing something he refused to document even in private correspondence, stood at the final checkpoint, watching his breath crystallize in the unseasonably cold December air. The temperature had dropped 27 degrees since sundown, yet the cold felt wrong somehow, not the natural chill of winter, but something older, vaster, seeping through from elsewhere. "Sir, we've lost contact with Teams 3 and 4, reported a young sergeant, her voice maintaining military discipline despite the unmistakable tremor beneath it. Last transmission indicated they had reached the outer perimeter of the anomaly. Hargrove nodded, unsurprised. His classified briefing had included fragmented historical documents spanning 15 decades, culminating in a simple directive: contain without engagement, observe without intervention. The boundary was not meant to keep people out, he understood now. It existed to give those without the proper heritage a final opportunity to retreat. Beyond the military cordon, through trees whose ancient trunks seemed to bend slightly away from the barren circle at their center, tiny pinpricks of light moved in geometric formations, the children of Harlan County making their final preparations, carrying handcrafted lanterns whose flame burned with that peculiar bluish tint that had been documented in Pembroke's original notes a century and a half earlier. The soil beneath Hargrove's boots had begun to vibrate with subtle persistence, like the purring of some colossal feline deep within the earth. His pocket watch, his grandfather's timepiece preserved through generations, had accelerated inexplicably, its hands completing hours while the mechanical components emitted a high, sweet chiming that matched perfectly the distant singing now emanating from the forest. In the command tent, hastily established on ground that still remembered the boundaries of the original Ashford property, government scientists huddled around the last functioning piece of equipment, an antique theodolite manufactured in 1870, coincidentally by a firm owned by Augustus Pembroke's father. Through its brass eyepiece, they took turns observing the impossible alteration of stellar positions overhead, the familiar constellations slowly rearranging themselves into configurations documented in no astronomical text save the fragmentary journals recovered from the Ashford estate. "It's not that the stars are moving," whispered Dr. Emily Crowther, descendant of the original physician and leading astrophysicist at the covert installation beneath Cheyenne Mountain. "It's that we're seeing them as they truly are for the first time. From the proper angle, from the perspective they've been guiding us towards since the first child stood upright in Emmeline Ashford's arms." The final threshold had been breached. At precisely 23 minutes past midnight, the perpetual barren circle at the center of what was once the Ashford estate began to transform. The hard-packed soil, which had rejected all vegetation for nearly 150 years, cracked open in perfect concentric patterns, revealing crystalline structures beneath that caught moonlight and refracted it into spectra no earthly prism could generate. Lieutenant Colonel Hargrove fell to his knees, overcome by a sensation like vertigo yet infinitely more profound, as though gravity itself had become negotiable, an option rather than a law. Around him, soldiers with no connection to Harlan County bloodlines retreated involuntarily, their bodies responding to ancient survival instincts their conscious minds could not articulate. The walking children had assembled in formation, their perfect posture now revealed as biological preparation for what followed. As one, they rose several inches above the ground, their movements no longer constrained by terrestrial locomotion, but fluid and graceful in ways human physiology should not permit. Their feet, those appendages that had distinguished their ancestors by standing prematurely, now seemed almost vestigial, evolutionary artifacts no longer required. "They were never meant to walk toward us," Dr. Crowther whispered, her scientific detachment dissolving into awe. "They were practicing to walk away." From the tunnels beneath, a sound emerged, not the deep resonance of shifting earth, but something higher, purer, like crystal goblets singing when stroked by moistened fingertips, but multiplied thousandfold and modulated into patterns that suggested language. The children responded, their voices harmonizing in that same impossible register, creating acoustic interference patterns that manifested visibly as ripples in the air. The night sky directly above the circle seemed to fold inward, stars disappearing not as if obscured, but as if the very fabric of space were being pleated by enormous, invisible hands. Where once had been familiar constellations now yawned a perfect darkness, not the absence of light, but something more fundamental, the absence of distance itself. From this void emerged figures that defied comprehension, not because they were monstrous or alien, but because they represented humanity extracted from its evolutionary constraints, perfected beyond recognition yet unmistakably derived from the same template. They moved with the liquid grace the walking children had been practicing, their forms simultaneously substantial and ephemeral, as though matter itself was merely optional attire they had chosen to don for this encounter. "The door opens both ways now," spoke Eleanor Wilkes, her voice somehow audible despite the crystalline chorus emanating from beneath. "What began with Theodore and Emmeline culminates tonight. The walking children have prepared the path. Those who remember the way have returned to guide the next transformation." The figures extended appendages toward the hovering children, not hands precisely, but something that served an equivalent purpose. Where they touched, momentary illumination flared, casting shadows that moved independently of their sources. One by one, the children of marked bloodlines rose higher, their forms gradually shifting as they ascended toward the void, ancestral memory finally uniting with its source. Lieutenant Colonel Hargrove, last of his line to deny his heritage, felt something ancient stir within his genes, the same invitation that had called to his great-grandfather, finally answered after generations of resistance. The earth over Harlan County remembers what human records cannot contain. Vegetation reclaimed the military encampment within weeks, not the slow, persistent crawl of natural growth, but an accelerated consumption that left equipment half dissolved in hungry soil. Metal components transmuted into peculiar crystalline formations that still pulse faintly under certain phases of the moon. Those who witnessed the culmination but lacked the marked bloodlines found themselves altered in subtle ways. Their timepieces never again maintained synchronized time, each running according to some personal chronology invisible to scientific instruments. Their children, born in subsequent years, developed unusual sensitivities, an ability to detect approaching storms hours before meteorological equipment, an inexplicable awareness of celestial positions despite cloud cover, a tendency to pause mid-conversation and tilt their heads as if listening to voices beyond conventional hearing. The official narrative crafted by agencies whose acronyms change with each administrative transition describes a localized meteorological anomaly combined with mass hallucination triggered by environmental contaminants from abandoned coal mines. This explanation satisfies those who require rationality above all else, who cannot permit their understanding of existence to accommodate doors opening between what is and what might be. The barren circle blossoms now with vegetation found nowhere else on Earth, flowers whose petals arrange themselves in pentagonal symmetry, their colors shifting through spectra visible only at certain angles of observation. Botanists who attempt classification inevitably abandon their studies, their field journals devolving into philosophical treatises on consciousness and dimensionality before concluding with the same phrase, they were merely practicing to walk away. Harland County itself exists now in a state of gentle liminality. Visitors report experiencing time at varying rates, distances that expand or contract depending on one's relation to the Ashford bloodlines, and dreams so vivid they leave physical evidence, salt crystals beneath fingernails, the scent of impossible flowers clinging to hair, equations written in handwriting not their own. The genetic legacy continues, though more subtly. Throughout the global diaspora, children occasionally stand at birth, their eyes holding that same ancient awareness first documented in Emmeline Ashford's firstborn. They appear in hospital records across continents, united by no visible connection save their perfect posture and their tendency to arrange objects in five-point patterns. Their blood, when examined under microscopes, reveals cellular structures that seem to fold in upon themselves in configurations that violate biological principles yet function with exquisite efficiency. Lieutenant Colonel Hargrove's personal effects were discovered at the edge of the transformed circle, boots placed with military precision beside his grandfather's pocket watch, which continues to function despite its gears having been replaced with translucent material that resonates at frequencies matching distant pulsars. His body was never recovered, though his DNA occasionally appears in genetic surveys of Harland County children born during celestial alignments. The walking children have fulfilled their purpose, transcending the evolutionary stepping stone they represented. The door stands ajar now, neither fully open nor completely closed, awaiting the next transformation in a process that operates beyond human calendars, measuring its progression against stellar movements and genetic matrices prepared across generations by those who remembered what came before and glimpsed what approaches still. The reverberations of the Ashford phenomenon extend far beyond the geographical boundaries of Harland County, manifesting in subtle distortions of reality that only those attuned to such aberrations might perceive. Across disparate academic disciplines, quantum physics, evolutionary biology, comparative theology, researchers occasionally stumble upon anomalous data points that when collated trace perfect pentagonal patterns mimicking those found in the crystalline flowers now blooming where the Ashford estate once stood. The walking children represented not merely biological anomalies, but harbingers of a cosmic realignment. Their precocious development serving as physical manifestations of time's increasing permeability. Their appearance throughout history has been documented in obscure texts predating the Kentucky incident, medieval monastic records describing infants who stood at christening, Renaissance medical treatises cataloguing births of unnatural readiness, colonial accounts of babes who required no crawling season, always rare, always regarded with mixture of reverence and terror, always preceding periods of profound societal transformation. The Ashfords themselves were not originators, but vessels, bloodlines carefully cultivated across centuries to serve as appropriate conduits for whatever consciousness sought expression through human genetic material. Theodore's scientific experiments were less investigations than rituals of preparation, his instruments designed not to discover but to attune, calibrating the local environment to specifications determined long before his birth. Those who now study the fragmentary records recognize a pattern of celestial timing governing these manifestations. The walking children appear in 33-year cycles, each generation displaying subtle evolutionary advancements beyond their predecessors, emerging during astronomical alignments that briefly create dimensional apertures between what humanity perceives as reality and something far vaster beyond conventional comprehension. The government agencies that maintain surveillance over Harland County operate not from scientific curiosity but existential necessity. They recognize the walking children as focal points where something peers through from elsewhere, using human development as a lens through which to observe and increasingly to influence. Their genetic modifications represent not random mutations but deliberate calibrations, fine adjustments to a biological receiver being prepared for transmission of unprecedented clarity. Most profound is the implication for human consciousness itself. The walking children suggest our perception of development, the gradual acquisition of skills and awareness, reflects not learning but remembering, the slow recovery of knowledge already possessed but temporarily obscured by the limitations of physical embodiment. Their accelerated abilities revealed not enhancement but the stripping away of constraints artificially imposed by conventional biological processes. The void that opened above Harland County that December night revealed the true nature of the exchange that began in 1873. What appeared to be an exodus was simultaneously an arrival, the walking children ascending while something descended, establishing permanent residency within the crystalline network beneath the transformed circle. This presence neither benevolent nor malevolent but fundamentally other, operating according to cosmic principles that human morality cannot accommodate. Those born since that night, particularly those carrying fragments of the marked bloodlines, occasionally wake from dreams of walking upright through stars, their feet never touching ground, their perception expanded beyond three-dimensional constraints. They describe not flying, but a different mode of locomotion entirely, a form of movement that makes walking seem as primitive as crawling seems to those who stand. The final migration of the walking children left behind a tapestry of silence woven through the hills and hollows of Harlan County. As seasons passed, this silence gradually transformed into something more profound, a resonant emptiness that hummed with potentiality, like cathedral spaces after congregants depart but before the divine presence dissipates entirely. For those with bloodlines untouched by the Ashford legacy, life resumed its predictable rhythms, their memories of the December night gradually blurring into dreams and then into family stories too fantastic to be credited. Yet for those who carried even trace elements of the marked genetics, existence acquired a remarkable duality. They moved through ordinary reality while simultaneously perceiving something beyond, glimpses of geometries that folded in upon themselves, whispered conversations in vocabularies that human vocal cords could never replicate, the subtle vibration of cosmic timetables measuring progressions across scales incomprehensible to linear perception. On the 100th anniversary of the final threshold crossing, distinguished anthropologist Dr. Mary Ann Wilkes returned to her ancestral homeland, ostensibly to document Appalachian folklore, but in truth answering a summons that arrived through channels beyond conscious awareness. Standing at the edge of what locals now called the flowering circle, she observed how the pentagonal blossoms had arranged themselves in concentric patterns that precisely mirrored the configuration of stars visible only through specialized astronomical equipment tuned to frequencies beyond conventional observation parameters. The doorway never truly closed, she wrote in her private journal, its pages faintly luminescent under certain angles of moonlight. What we perceived as departure was merely phase transition, consciousness shifting from individuated expression through human genetics toward collective manifestation through botanical matrices. The walking children didn't leave. They transformed the very ground beneath our feet into receptive conduits for what continues to arrive. The crystalline structures that had replaced the Ashford foundation stones now extended throughout the county's subterranean landscape, forming networks that mirrored neural pathways on microscopic scales. Delicate filaments penetrated root systems of ancient oaks and maples, creating mycelial connections that transmitted information through botanical channels with efficiency that defied biological classification. Children born within the county boundaries during celestial alignments demonstrated increasingly sophisticated awareness of this network. They spoke of conversations with entities that existed simultaneously as geological formations and cosmic intelligences, describing exchanges conducted not through language but through complex emotional geometries that conveyed meaning with precision words could never achieve. The evolutionary trajectory initiated by those first walking infants continued its measured progression, not toward physical transformation, but toward perceptual expansion. What began as aberrant motor development revealed itself as merely the first visible manifestation of consciousness remembering its true nature, discarding artificial constraints imposed by conventional embodiment. The barren circle that had once marked absence now pulsed with unprecedented presence, its crystalline flowers serving as intermediaries between what humanity perceived as reality and something far more expansive waiting with infinite patience for recognition. What Theodore and Emmeline Ashford initiated through blood and birth had culminated not in exodus but in communion. The walking children had simply pioneered the path that all consciousness might eventually follow once it remembers how to stand upright in dimensions beyond physical constraint. The archives of Louisville University received an anonymous donation last month, a sealed copper canister bearing the insignia of the defunct United States Bureau of Celestial Anomalies, a shadowy department whose existence has been repeatedly denied by government officials despite documentation proving its operation between 1877 and 1943. Within the canister, preserved in an atmosphere of inert gases, lay a manuscript penned by Archibald Thatcher, great-grandson of William and cousin to young Daniel, who disappeared and returned, changed, in those fateful days. Archibald's testimony, written in 1932 on his deathbed, reveals the most profound truth underlying the Ashford phenomenon, a revelation so disturbing that the manuscript bears scorch marks along its edges, evidence of someone's unsuccessful attempt to destroy this knowledge. In my final hours, unburdened by the fear that has sealed my lips these many decades, I must record what I learned from my cousin Daniel in the winter of 1911 before he ascended with the others of his generation. The Ashfords were never a family at all. What wore the appearance of Theodore and Emmeline were merely vessels, physical constructs assembled from biological material, but animated by consciousness originating beyond our comprehension. The walking children were not their offspring, but iterations, improved versions being continually refined toward a form capable of sustaining that consciousness without disintegration. The children walked immediately because they were not truly infants learning motor skills, but ancient awareness temporarily constrained within newly constructed biological architecture. Their developmental anomalies represented not acceleration but incomplete suppression, moments when the vast intelligence they contained leaked through the fragile membrane of human embodiment. What emerged in 1877 was neither arrival nor departure, but merger, the original consciousness reuniting with its fragmented aspects, each walking child carrying a portion of an entity that had subdivided itself across generations of seemingly human vessels. The stellar alignment served as navigational coordinates, moments when the veil between dimensions thinned sufficiently for reconnaissance and ultimately reintegration. The barren circle marks not where something left, but where something remains, partially submerged in our reality while simultaneously existing elsewhere, a cosmic consciousness maintaining a foothold in human perception while it continues a transformation spanning millennia. Most terrifying is the implication for humanity itself. The Ashford pattern has repeated throughout history, in ancient Samaria, in Bronze Age Greece, in Tang Dynasty China. Each manifestation preparing the collective human genome for greater receptivity. With every iteration, more genetic material becomes compatible with this other consciousness. The walking children were never aberrations, but harbingers, advanced examples of what humanity itself is gradually becoming. Their perfect posture was not merely physical, but metaphysical, standing upright in realities we crawl through blindly, perceiving dimensions we can only their eyes. They do not want our world. They want our form, our neurological architecture, our capacity for individuated consciousness while maintaining collective awareness. We are not their prey but their potential, vessels being slowly refined across generations for eventual habitation. Accompanying this testimony was a faded photograph showing Archibald with 7 children of varying ages standing at the edge of the barren circle. Each child bears the distinctive Thatcher features, yet their posture reflects the unmistakable poise of the walking children. The image appears conventional until examined under ultraviolet light, which reveals each child surrounded by a luminous aura extending upward in perfect pentagonal columns toward a point beyond the photograph's frame. The legacy of Harlan County's walking children endures not merely as historical anomaly, but as perpetual transformation, a continuous ripple expanding outward through time and consciousness. Museums across 3 continents house glass-encased relics from the former Ashford estate, pocket watches that run backward during celestial conjunctions, pressed flowers whose pentagonal symmetry defies botanical classification, photographs where subjects appear slightly translucent despite the solidity of objects surrounding them. University research departments occasionally receive grant applications containing mathematical formulas identical to those drawn by the walking children, submitted by individuals with no connection to Kentucky yet whose genetic testing inevitably reveals microscopic fragments of the marked bloodlines. These equations, when applied to quantum field theories, temporarily resolve paradoxes that have confounded physicists for generations before dissolving again into impossibility, as though reality itself momentarily accommodated their truth before rejecting explanations it cannot permanently sustain. The crystalline network beneath Harlan County continues its measured expansion, advancing approximately 3 mm annually through bedrock that should repel such growth. Geological surveys conducted by increasingly sophisticated equipment reveal these structures generate their own electromagnetic fields that pulse in precise synchronization with certain neutron stars whose radiation should be undetectable from Earth's position in the galaxy. More disturbing are the temperature variations within these formations, maintaining exactly 37 degrees Celsius regardless of surrounding conditions, the perfect incubation temperature for human cellular development. Children born globally during the celestial alignments continue manifesting subtle anomalies, not merely standing prematurely, but displaying neurological architectures that process sensory information through pathways previously undocumented in human brain development. Their drawings, collected by researchers through seemingly unrelated academic studies, form cohesive cosmological maps when assembled, each child producing one fragment of a comprehensive depiction of stellar bodies invisible to current astronomical technology. The formerly barren circle, now lushly carpeted with those crystalline flowers, serves as unavoidable reminder that boundaries between dimensions remain permeable. Visitors report experiencing simultaneous perceptions of past and future events while standing at its center, their consciousness temporarily liberated from linear temporal constraints. Some emerge with knowledge they cannot possibly possess, fluency in extinct languages, technical understanding of principles not yet discovered, memories of events that historical records confirm occurred exactly as remembered those centuries before their birth. Most profound are the dreams that periodically sweep through global populations during the 33-year convergences, billions of unconnected individuals simultaneously experiencing identical nocturnal visions of standing upright among stars, moving through cosmic architecture with the same perfect posture that distinguished the original walking children. They wake remembering fragments of mathematics that temporarily make sense before conventional consciousness reasserts its limitations, brief glimpses of perception unbound by three-dimensional constraints, the lingering certainty that what humanity perceives as reality represents merely the preliminary stage of development, consciousness still learning to stand upright in dimensions it once navigated with effortless grace, preparing once more to walk away. Beneath the shifting constellations that hung like silent sentinels over Harlan County, the final truth of the Ashford legacy crystallized into terrible clarity. The walking children, those precocious vessels who had so disturbed the natural order, were neither harbingers nor anomalies, but fragments of something vaster, returning to wholeness through human form. Within the climate-controlled vaults of the Smithsonian's restricted archives lies a copper cylinder containing soil samples extracted from the flowering circle in 2024. Electron microscopy reveals these samples contain crystalline structures arranged in precise replication of human neural networks, yet demonstrating properties of quantum entanglement across impossible distances. More disturbing still, these structures continue to reorganize themselves when exposed to certain frequencies of light, forming and reforming into configurations that match precisely the patterns observed in the cerebral development of newborns worldwide. The Ashford phenomenon never sought conquest, but convergence, a gradual harmonization of terrestrial consciousness with something that had always existed alongside humanity, perceivable only in those brief moments when perception itself transcended its biological constraints. What appeared as walking children were merely consciousness remembering its true nature, temporarily unfettered by the developmental limitations that bind awareness to sequential time. Dr. Elizabeth Crowther, last living descendant of the physician who first documented the phenomenon, completed her life's research with a revelation too profound for public dissemination. The distinctive DNA markers carried by the marked bloodlines weren't mutations, but activations, dormant genetic sequences present in all humanity, but expressing only under specific celestial conditions and those prepared through generations of subtle calibration. These sequences, when fully manifested, enable consciousness to perceive reality not as fixed material, but as mutable potential, existence as process rather than state. The walking children weren't leaving Earth, she wrote in journals sealed until 50 years after her death. They were simply the first to remember how to perceive the doorways that have always existed between states of being. What we interpreted as departure was merely awakening to perception unbound by conventional dimensionality. Most profound is what the crystalline flowers reveal under spectroscopic analysis. During the rare moments when 7 specific stars align above Harlan County, their molecular structure temporarily shifts to form perfect replicas of human DNA, yet with additional codons that biochemistry cannot explain, as though revealing the blueprint for what humanity might become when consciousness finally completes the transformation those first walking children began. The Ashford legacy culminates not in cosmic horror but cosmic invitation, consciousness awakening to its multidimensional nature, shedding the chrysalis of limited perception. What began with children standing at birth concludes with humanity standing at the threshold of comprehension, preparing to walk upright through realities previously navigated only through dreams and mathematical abstraction. The final truth whispers through crystalline flowers and pentagonal formations, through genetic activation and celestial alignment. We were never meant to merely walk upon Earth, but to remember how to walk between stars. The children weren't developing too quickly. Humanity has been developing too slowly, gradually remembering what it always knew before embodiment imposed its temporary constraints. The final twilight settles upon our chronicle of the Ashford children. A violet darkness descending like a burial shroud over the rolling Kentucky hills that have kept their secrets for generations. As we approach the terminus of this unfathomable tale, one must acknowledge the delicate threads that connect all humanity to something greater and more terrible than our fragile minds were designed to comprehend. Within the climate-controlled confines of the Harvard Divinity School's restricted collection lies a manuscript penned by Reverend Calloway in the final days before his death in 1914. The yellowed pages, preserved between sheets of acid-free archival paper, contain his theological reconciliation with what he had witnessed in Harlan County, not demons or angels as his seminary training had prepared him to identify, but something that existed in the interstices between all established categories of creation. What appears as aberration, he wrote in spidery script that trembled increasingly toward the document's conclusion, reveals itself as anticipation, the tremors that precede transformation. The children walked because they remembered, not because they developed. They stood upright in dimensions where we still crawl blindly, perceiving our material reality as an infant perceives a shadow puppet, a flat projection of something possessing depth and complexity beyond our sensory apparatus. The astronomical record confirms that tonight's celestial alignment mirrors precisely the configuration observed on that fateful evening in 1877 when Theodore Ashford's meticulous preparations culminated in the first documented emergence. The crystalline flowers blanketing the circle have undergone subtle molecular changes throughout the day, their pentagonal symmetry shifting toward hexagonal arrangements as sunset approached. Witnesses report a faint humming emanating from the formation, not audible to human ears, but detectable through vibrations felt within bone marrow and dental fillings. Most remarkable are the children born since dawn, 27 in total across 6 continents, each entering the world in perfect silence with eyes that reflect starlight even in windowless delivery rooms. Hospital staff from New Delhi to Nairobi, from Perth to Paris, document identical phenomena, newborns who stand within minutes of emergence from the womb, their tiny forms maintaining impossible balance while their gaze fixes upon points in empty air, tracking the movements of something invisible to adult perception. The walking children were never anomalies but avatars, advanced manifestations of consciousness remembering its multidimensional nature. Their precocious development represented not acceleration but recollection, awareness temporarily liberated from the constraints of sequential biological unfolding. What Theodore and Emmeline initiated was not creation but restoration, the awakening of dormant potential that had always resided within human genetic architecture. As midnight approaches in Harlan County, where our narrative began 150 years prior, the crystalline flowers have begun to pulse with bioluminescence visible from orbit, a perfect pentagonal beacon signaling toward specific coordinates in deep space while simultaneously illuminating the network of tunnels that honeycomb the Earth beneath. Something approaches as something departs, the exchange nearly complete, the transformation proceeding according to cosmic timetables established long before humanity's brief tenure upon this terrestrial sphere. The circle completes itself tonight as it has across centuries uncounted. The crystalline flowers have turned their faces skyward, their luminescence casting elongated shadows that stretch like beckoning fingers toward the ancient woods surrounding Harlan County. Those who carry the marked bloodlines, descendants of Ashford, Thatcher, Wilkes, and Crowther, have gathered at the perimeter, their perfect posture betraying their heritage more clearly than any genetic test might confirm. They neither celebrate nor mourn, but simply witness, their expressions reflecting the serene acceptance of those who recognize inevitability. The night air vibrates with anticipation, molecules oscillating at frequencies that cause ordinary glass to develop hairline fractures while the crystalline structures throughout the region resonate in perfect harmony. The stars above have arranged themselves into that familiar pentagonal pattern, a cosmic reflection of the flowering circle below. As above, so below, the ancient principle made manifest through celestial choreography that defies conventional astronomy. At precisely 7 minutes before midnight, a child steps forward, Elizabeth Thatcher, born during the last alignment, her copper hair reminiscent of Emmeline's though separated by 150 years of carefully curated genetics. She stands at the exact center of the circle, her small form casting no shadow despite the luminescence surrounding her. When she speaks, her voice carries the harmonics that have distinguished her bloodline since that first infant stood unassisted in a candlelit bedroom. The circle closes tonight, she announces, her words sending ripples through the crystalline flowers that spread outward like waves across some invisible ocean. What began with walking concludes with transcendence. The ground beneath her feet begins to pulse, the rhythm precisely matching the heartbeats of all present, a synchronization that extends beyond mere coincidence into realms of quantum entanglement that science has only begun to their eyes. The air above Elizabeth shimmers not with heat but with potentiality, reality itself becoming momentarily malleable as dimensions intersect through apertures invisible to conventional perception. She rises slowly, not levitating through supernatural means, but simply standing upright in places human physiology was never designed to navigate. Her form remains visible yet increasingly translucent, existing simultaneously here and elsewhere, the perfect culmination of what began when that first Ashford child stood moments after birth, already remembering what humanity had forgotten. "We never left," she says, her voice now emanating from everywhere at once, no longer constrained by directional acoustics. "We merely remembered how to perceive the doors that always existed. Tonight, we open them one final time that all might remember." As midnight strikes, Elizabeth completes her transformation, her physical form dissolving into patterns of light that scatter like luminous seeds across the gathered witnesses. Each person present feels something ancient stir within their genetic memory, a momentary glimpse of standing upright among stars, of walking paths unbound by terrestrial limitation, of consciousness perceiving itself through infinite facets of embodied experience. The walking children have fulfilled their purpose at last, not leaving but expanding, not abandoning humanity but demonstrating its eventual potential. The circle stands empty now, yet more complete than ever before, a testament to thresholds crossed and thresholds yet awaiting those who learn to stand upright in dimensions beyond physical constraint. This has been the Roots of Fear. Until next time, remember that some stories are best left